Hello and welcome to this next episode of our webinar series. Today we're covering ZIA, Zap It All, configuring your cyber force field without the forced fumbles. And today I'm very lucky to be joined with Mike Diermeyer. He's a senior product manager here at Zscaler for cybersecurity. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be here.
And I am Chris Louie. I'm a customer success architect here at Zscaler, and going to jump right into the agenda. Today we're going to talk about JA4 visibility, move on to SSL inspection for developer tools, and we're going to close with two items here that deal with the endpoints. And the first one's going to be endpoint context, and then the last one being the endpoint sandbox. So I hope this makes for an enjoyable webinar for you. And since we will be talking about some features, depending when you watch this, may not be available quite yet, did want to throw in this safe harbor slide here. So without further ado, I thought this image was very apropos that the global hackers out there are the SWAT team with the battering ram, and the only thing that's holding them back are our cybersecurity defenses, which is the equivalent of a Cheeto potato chip, which is good enough to close the doors. Is it good enough to stop the battering ram? Probably not, but I thought this was an interesting point of view for the state of today's global security affairs. And we're going to jump right into the content here with JA4 visibility. And this is something that was added to our Zscaler Internet Access platform to support what's something called JA4 fingerprinting. And the goal here really is to detect suspicious traffic, but for non-managed endpoints. And then that non-managed is key here. So I'll turn over to Mike to explain that a little bit.
Thanks, Chris. So the unmanaged part of this basically means devices that don't support the Zscaler client connector, right? So whether that's BYOD or guest devices, or things like IoT or OT, or even things like printers or anything that's on the network that cannot have a Zscaler certificate installed into it. JA4 gives us the capability to actually tell if there is malware or suspicious things happening in those connections going out to the internet and things like that, even without being able to decrypt the traffic. And so by being able to fingerprint the traffic, the connection, various other things that are part of JA4, we'll actually be able to tell whether this device is behaving or if it's potentially compromised, for example. And so it allows us to detect things that we otherwise would not be able to without JA4.
And this is sort of that happy compromise because I think as a security industry as a whole, we love encryption, we love
Mhm.
privacy, but it's a huge pain because the attackers love that too, and they know that it's a challenge to be able to decrypt that traffic. So if we're able to look inside the encrypted traffic without actually decrypting that traffic, I think that gets us one step closer to where we want to be because I don't want to be in the business of inspecting people's encrypted traffic. I'd love it to not be able to see that, and I think this is at least getting more in that direction.
Exactly. And so this is just going to be available for unmanaged devices, at least for now. So
Okay, yeah, and I have a screenshot here of what this will eventually look like. You can see that the traffic from an initiated client going to a destination, you'll notice all the fingerprints are the same because it's the same client going to the same destination. And if, for example, my smart thermometer that I have in my fish tank, it phones home to the server and says it reports the temperature every 5 seconds. It reports the temperature, but all of a sudden it starts reaching out to this rogue server somewhere else, or the TLS negotiation changes a little bit, and that's probably a cause for concern.
definitely can be a indicator of compromise. Although, it also could be related to like a firmware update if they change, something about the software, things like that. But yeah, the idea here is to be able to kind of get a baseline of what all of these things look like. And then if there's a sudden change that's unexpected, that should basically prompt investigation.
Yeah, and then hopefully it's as benign as a firmware update, or I might have a state back actor on my fish tank thermometer. So either way, probably good idea to check it out.
Exactly.
All right, on to our next item here, which are developer tools. And with developer tools, this has traditionally been a challenge for some of our customers to be able to inspect those with things like they have their own certificate stores, or sometimes there's certificate pinned applications. And we've heard them loud and clear. And we actually have a path to help our customers out with being able to either inspect developer tools or at least provide enough levers that they can pull the correct lever that's appropriate for their organization.
Right. So the idea here is that more often than not for developers, a lot of our customers bypass SSL inspection for everything the developer is doing, right? Which is obviously overly broad and could potentially introduce a bunch of blind spots and potential risk and things like that. And so the idea with this is we're giving several different tools to kind of resolve it, depending on what the preference of the organization is, right? So one of the ways that we're talking about is coming out with a product that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes called Endpoint Context. But the idea is we're going to be able to basically say all the traffic coming from a device with the ZC on it, or the client connector, um, basically we're going to bypass SSL inspection based on the application being used. And so in this case, we're going to have a list of common developer tools like IDEs, integrated development environments, or other utilities. And the fact that the developer is using one of the applications on that list, it'll be a simple policy to set up and just say, go into SSL, here's this list of tools for developers, and bypass SSL. So you won't have to do it on an individual basis. You'll also be able to add things to that list if there's some custom things you're using that for whatever reason we haven't added to the list and things like that. And then there's also some other capabilities coming here pretty quickly about being able to do automated installation of the Zscaler certs into apps with cert stores and things like that. And so we're basically giving every customer that struggles with this the flexibility to either bypass it completely or to automate the installation of the certs so that we can continue decrypting that traffic and ensuring there's no threats and things in it.
Yeah, and I think it's just like I mentioned before, it's also important to note that us as Zscaler, we give the customer all the tools. So if they want to inspect everything, they can inspect everything, unless it's technically not possible through pinning. But it's up to each individual organization to determine their own risk profile, what's the acceptable risk, and then allow them to either bypass it, either to inspect it, or bypass everything, or inspect everything. But we at least provide enough tools that each organization can make their own decision.
Right. And speaking of CertPinned, that is another list of applications as well, because we know there's a ton of those, right? Certain vendors tend to CertPin everything. And so that's the other way that we're providing flexibility is you will no longer have to go in and do those exceptions on an application by application basis. We'll have the list that we've already predefined. You can add new things to it and just bypass SSL inspection for everything that is CertPinned so that you don't have any problems.
Let me tell you, Mike, that's music to every Zscaler admin's ears, being able to figure out exactly what's cert pin. If you say certificate pinning to any Zscaler admin, you can imagine what kind of reaction they have having to administer that.
Oh, yeah. It's
So
definitely difficult.
that's great news.
Yeah.
On more great news, we were introduced a little bit to this concept called endpoint context. That if my machine reaches out to Microsoft.com or GitHub.com, it's good to know that me as Chris Louis went there. But I want to know what went out there. Was it PuTTY? Was it a Git client? Was it a web request? And now we're getting a little bit more of that context to help organizations make more intelligent decisions and policy choices for their access based on the at a process level now.
Exactly. And so we're adding this capability to ZCC. And basically what it is just like Chris said, is we're now going to have the visibility from the endpoint all the way out to the cloud about what application is reaching out to what website, right? But then we're also doing additional telemetry, things like quantifying the potential risk or threat that that application may pose to you as an organization. For example, if a binary has an invalid signature, that oftentimes can be an indicator of compromise that someone has tampered with that particular binary, right? And so you can see over here on the right, the application by code signing status basically allows you to say, okay, here's all the ones that have a valid signature, expired, so on and so forth. And then we're also being able to reference all these things in policy, as I mentioned earlier, for the cert pinning and SSL. We're also doing adding these tools to things like the DNS policy, the firewall policy, ATP will automatically have all of this data in it as well. And so it's going to also give us the ability to, for example, detect living off the land type of attacks where something is trying to blend in amongst the traffic, and maybe it's usually a legitimate tool that someone's using, but someone's obviously abusing it and trying to compromise things. And so the metadata and things that we're bringing with this, and then the new flexibility, new reporting, et cetera, is going to expand the visibility that admins have about what is happening on the device, and what app is being used, things like that. And then eventually down the road, that is also going to potentially turn into other levers of control, right? And so, for example, if you have an unsanctioned app, right, that someone's installed, you're going to be able to just go into the firewall or DNS and just say, if someone's using, say, Tor, for example, right, I want to block that. Or Brave, the Brave browser, for example, is another good example. It has a regular version, right, brave.exe, but it also has a Tor version. And so you'll be able to go in and say, I want to allow brave.exe, but I want to block Brave Tor, for example. And so you're going to get a lot more flexibility and things through the endpoint context.
Right. Yeah. And I see things like taking inventory here, looking at invalid signatures. I can foresee like using this in combination with like allow listing software that says you're only allowed to run software that has a valid signature. And then if you see something on here that has invalid, it's like, wait a minute, something got through.
Right. That's definitely one of the use cases. The other thing we're doing with this is we're enumerating all of the vulnerabilities for these applications. The reason being is if we think about something like a browser, right? Chrome, Brave, whatever. Um, Oftentimes, most organizations have several different versions of those applications installed, right? And so we're taking a complete application inventory of all the installed applications uh, or running applications that are creating network traffic, and then basically giving you the ability to say, okay, I might have 4 versions of Chrome that are prevalent, 2 or 3 that are updated or near updated, right, fairly recently. But then what if you have one that's from several years ago that's still around that has a number of high severity or critical severity CVEs? And so that's the other thing that will allow you to go in and say, I'm going to allow these versions of Chrome, but I'm going to block these other exploitable versions of Chrome or other types of applications. And so the flexibility and visibility is a major part of this feature. So.
Okay, great. And I just have a yet another screenshot here of a
Yep.
endpoint activity name called chrome.exe. It's being run from the command line here. So this is an example. We have it marked here as a Cobalt Strike code injection block with one of our IPS signatures here.
Right. So the scenario here is on anything that we deem to be a risky application. We also record the parent path where the application was basically called from, and even the command line arguments, right? And so this is part of us giving you as admins the availability or the visibility rather down to the endpoint. And so no longer is it just, oh, we're blocking this outbound connection that we recognize as being a C2 or other type of thread. You're also now going to have the visibility of exactly where that came from on the endpoint, where it was executed from, what command line arguments. And the idea is to basically be able to also tell the difference between, say, a legit version of Chrome, right, and a Trojanized version of Chrome, right? In this case, you can actually see the top record. If you can go slightly back before yep. So the top row there says Chrome, company, Google LLC, valid digital signature, et cetera. And then the application type is well known, right? So what that means for this reporting is we as Zscaler have built an inventory of well-known apps that we see in use across many organizations, right? Discovered is something that ZCC went and found on the local hard drive. And you'll notice that those applications say Chrome.exe instead of Google Chrome, and the company's Chrome, right? And so you're immediately able to tell, hey, here's a legit version of Google Chrome, and here's something else masquerading potentially as Google Chrome. And so it will stick out pretty clearly through the visibility, that the logging. And then this is also all available to be ported through our Nanolog streaming for those that use SIEM, types of scenarios. And so you'll be able to see that the entire application inventory and all of these additional fields are available once this product releases.
Right. Yeah, I remember maybe it was like back in Windows XP. I do remember some malware trying to hide as like svchost.exe,
Yes.
and it's like, well, that's benign. That's obviously a Microsoft thing. Like, nope. Now we actually have some context around it. It's not published by Microsoft, no valid signature. So then that should make it stick out like a sore thumb.
Right. And it's actually a good thing you brought up SVC's host, because, for example, uh, applications or OS common applications like within Windows or whatnot, we're not going to list all of those necessarily. Things like PowerShell or command.exe, we will, right, for controls. But if we're talking about a signed binary from Microsoft that we know is trustworthy and whatnot, those are not going to be in the application list for selection, just because if we were to list that, it would be obviously thousands or tens of thousands of those, right?
Yeah.
And so we've taken care to filter out basically noise from the application list so that you as admins can focus on the things that should get controlled versus trying to dig in too deep to that. And with our ZCC, we're actually going to be able to see where something originated, right? So in the situation up here, something actually started as PowerShell that then called the Chrome.exe and launched it and then walked through, right? That's why PowerShell is suspicious and Chrome.exe is suspicious. And so we're going to be able to see that entire chain of application A calling application B, calling application C, et cetera, through that attack chain.
Great. Great. I'm sure that's great for threat hunters as well to have that telemetry data there and be able to try to piece together exactly what happened.
Indeed. Yep, that was the idea.
All right, the last thing we're going to cover today, sort of related to endpoint context, is now endpoint sandbox, and this was a part of the Zero Trust Exchange that previously did not have coverage. And the example I would use is the good old Mr. Robot attack. Somebody just drops a bunch of USB drives in the parking lot. Someone says, "Hey, what's this?" And they plug it into their computer. Now we have a solution for that because even though that file didn't come through the Zero Trust Exchange, we can still verify if those files are malicious or benign.
That's exactly right. So somebody gets an unknown file not through the trust exchange, or maybe through Bluetooth or AirDrop or any sort of out of band type method. When that file gets moved or executed or whatnot, depending on the circumstances, if we don't know that it's known benign or known malicious, hence it's unknown, we will capture it, send it up to the cloud sandbox for analysis, and then the user will actually get feedback through the client connector here when something gets sandboxed, what the verdict is, for example. So I think the next two slides show off the message when it's benign or the message when it's malicious, for example, just so that the user has visibility into that entire process and the outcomes. Yeah, there you go. So that is coming as part of the endpoint context SKU that we're about to release or product that we're about to release. Um, on that, that is going to all be basically bundled for now. And so it requires the advanced cloud sandbox, but it's going to be a separate SKU that customers can opt into. And initially we're going to be in private preview. So we're looking for customers that are interested in trying this out and giving us feedback and things like that as well. So
Okay, great. Well, that's at least one attack vector, that one less attack vector that our admins will have to worry about, and things like file shares and AirDrop. Those are all methods. It's good to allow users to do those things, but it's also good to make sure no malware comes in through those channels. So I think this is closing that gap there of being able to see out of band files.
indeed.
All right, well, that is all we have for today. And if you would like to know more, just hop on over to zscaler.com/security, and you can learn all about the Zero Trust Exchange plus AI. And with that, I'd like to thank Mike for his time. Thank you for joining today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Chris.
I'd like to thank our listeners and our viewers here. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this webinar today. And as always, have a nice day. And I will stop the recording.